Welcome to Speak Our Mind Community Podcast, sharing the views and opinions of local residents in Camden.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our podcast today. We have a very special guest today. Would you please kindly introduce yourself to us, and please let us.
My name's Graham. I'm the director of Saint Pancras Community Association, which, as the name implies, is in the Saint Pancras area, in the northern part of it, and provides services for the local community.
So what kind of mental health support services does your organisation provide?
It does provide some services, and this podcast is an example of it, which is specifically tailored around mental health. But we also provide a lot of other services which support mental health in a whole host of ways. In a sense, almost everything we do is about mental health, because it's about helping the local community to live better lives. So that might include, for example, a lot of the work around physical health. So it's exercise classes, and it's particularly targeted at people who perhaps wouldn't otherwise do exercise. And we've also got children's programs and quite a large program for older people, and particularly older people who would otherwise be quite isolated, and just physically bringing them into the building and meeting each other and going out on outings and having exciting things to do together. It's not what you think of as mental health in that, this person isn't necessarily a mental health, inverted commas, patient, but it's beneficial to their mental health. And in many cases, I think it's quite preventative of mental health illnesses.
Absolutely, and that's really important, the preventative measures. So that's amazing, bringing people in just to meet each other. That's a great way of prevent, depression, loneliness, isolation. So how do local people access your services?
There's quite a wide variety of different methods. A lot of it, to be honest, we don't, certainly pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, but not during the pandemic, we didn't need to do that much in terms of outreach work, because people were coming to us in really pretty close to the numbers we could cope with. But we try to establish links with the local community, which can be made through a whole host of different things. So, for example, if we're working with older people, it's less likely that we'll use electronic media. If we're working with a young family, we're quite likely to use electronic media. Word of mouth and successful services is probably the biggest single factor. I think we've also used things like all the traditional things like posters and banners and so on. And again, pre and post-COVID, but not during COVID, we've also organised things like a large community festival each year, which has got the advantage it brings together lots of different groups from different parts of the community, and they all see each other's work and make connections with each other, which probably doesn't happen as much as in some ways we'd like in the normal way of things, because people usually come in for their mental health activity or their isolation activity or their childcare activity, and they tend not to mix across, because they come in at a certain time, certain rooms, and they're not mixing with each other as much as we'd like. And I think that's where a lot of the advantages of trying to get groups to work together actually can come across, and the festivals are great for that. So
this brings us to the next question. Who is your target demographic?
I think we've got a number of different demographics we're aiming to work with. I think they're probably divided into two main types of people and two main geographical groups. I'll deal with the geographicals first. We're primarily concerned for we're here for the benefit of people in Camden, and particularly in this part of Camden, which has got a very high incidence of almost every social, emotional issue that you might want to mention. On health, for example, I think that life expectancy here is about 10 or 11 years lower than it is 3 miles up the road. So it's very much targeted on this area, but people from anywhere in the borough of Camden, because Camden gives us quite a lot of financial support, will be able to benefit. So that would be our main geographic target audience. And then in terms of the type of people, the ones that we're primarily here to serve and the ones we're trying to actually benefit most of all would be the people who are most in need. So that'll be the people who are most likely to be in poor health, or most likely to be isolated, or most likely to be economically deprived, whatever the need is. But I think it's also important for us to actually involve the other people in Camden. Camden in general, and this part of it in particular, has got huge inequalities, and there are a lot of people who might not appear as needy on an individual basis because they've got good jobs and good incomes and good health and all the rest. But it's really important to involve them for two reasons. One of them is an economic one. They pay for services that other people get for free. And that helps us to actually function much more effectively as a charity. And the other reason is that I think if you just provide a community association only for people who are, inverted commas, needy, then what tends to happen is that A, that group doesn't integrate with the rest of the community. B, you end up with divisions between them. And C, you start to build up a reputation of as an organisation of, oh, that's where people with problems go. That's not the kind of reputation we want. So it really is a case of bringing together the whole community. And as I say, geographically, it's mostly centred on the Saint Pancras area because that's where the highest proportion of social need is. But it is really important to involve the rest of Camden as well.
Thank you for that. So what challenges does your organisation faces when delivering services, and how do we bridge that gap if you're facing any challenges?
Oh, goodness. This is a bit like a job interview, except I didn't prepare the questions so well in advance. Enormous challenges, but I think managing a community association is on obviously a hugely smaller scale, but it's a bit like running the country in that you have to actually think of old people, young people, black people, white people, rich people, poor people. You have to think about the fabric of the building. You have to think about the mental health of the people using your centre. You have to think about the mental health of your staff. You have to think about the physical fabric of the building. So, I think one of the things that I really like about working here, but I think a lot of other people who might be tempted by this kind of work, but sometimes they think, oh my goodness, I couldn't possibly, is actually trying to balance out all those different issues. Because almost every decision that we're taking here as an organisation, or me as an individual, you're having to think, well, okay, we could probably improve people's mental health by going down that avenue. But if we're doing that, we're actually using up a resource that actually makes a room unavailable for something else that might make an income for the organisation. Or it might be that we are doing something for 30-year-olds or sporty people that is taking up a resource that could otherwise be used for a refugee group that might not be interested in sport at all. So you're constantly having to balance all these different things. And I hesitate to say that there's any one type of challenge. I think it's if I was to say there was one challenge, it's probably how to bring together lots of other challenges and keep them in constant state of balance. And also trying to... Can you lend me a crystal ball? Because we need to know what's happening in the future. And nobody told me there was going to be COVID.
Yeah.
But what we did have was we had financial reserves. We'd actually spread our assets so that any one type of hit wasn't going to demobilise the whole organisation. And all right, that was a fairly extreme example with COVID. But you never know for sure what the future's going to bring. And I think trying to make good predictions of it is actually quite important. And it might well be that when people come to me, in fact, someone's been in today and talked about can they hire some of the building or some of the outside parts of it to do some firewalking as a fundraiser for their charity. And I'm thinking, well, yes, it sounds quite good. It sounds interesting. It could make some money for your charity. But does it make money for our charity? How are we going to cover our costs? What's the risk to the building? and what are our priorities in the future. So it's constantly balancing so many different things. And on a personal level, yes, it's sometimes stressful, but delegate stress, give it to other people if you can. And some people are really good at it as well. They're great at getting stressed. And I seem to manage relatively well without it, and I look forward to retirement. Please come, retirement. that last part is slightly facetious. In some ways I am looking forward to it, but in other ways I'm dreading it.
But I like it when he says it's like running a country, and you are running a country.
On a smaller scale. And please don't associate me with the Prime Minister.
Oh. Have you thought about different modern ways to embrace technology with your services? Is there any new way of doing things right now?
I think that's two different questions. New ways of doing things
and modern
ways of doing things, and the technology. I'd have to say, on a personal level, I struggle. Well, I wouldn't say I totally struggle with technology, but what I would say is that for someone who's the director of a charity, my technological skills and confidence are not as high as perhaps they might be. And it's been really nice, actually, in some ways, having people like Cheryl who actually use technology a lot. And that's actually doing a lot of things and bringing out this podcast, for example. I wouldn't have dreamt of doing something like this. And even though I'd probably have the skills to bring someone in to do it, it wouldn't have occurred to me that podcasting was a way of working. So having other people with different sets of skills on the staff team is very good from that point of view. And I think that it's nice actually having a staff team of, I don't know how many we've got, 14, 15 people, something of that kind, who all bring different ideas and different interests. And we've also got the other local charities that we're working alongside. And I was talking earlier about the fire walking. I wouldn't have dreamt of fire walking. But somebody else actually came and said, oh yeah, here's a different way of working. Here's a possible solution to some of our financial problems, and a way of getting more people into the community, and a way of getting different people in. So to me, I think people in my job, a lot of them 10, 15 years ago, we used to be called coordinators. And sometimes I think that was an accurate decision, an accurate description, because we were just coordinating, pinching ideas from other people. It's great. But I also think it's important that you actually, if you are, in my case, the title's director, some of us are called chief executives and so on. I think it's really important that you also direct on occasions, because there are constantly conflicts of interest. So, for example, the room that we're actually sitting in at the moment is equipped as a studio. Great. But then it can't be used so well for other things. And sometimes you're having to make decisions about this gets used that way, that gets used that way, that staff member gets this perk, that one doesn't. You can't please all the people all the time. And I think it's really important that you have a direction and also some kind of themes of work about what are your priorities for your organisation. And I think that you have to have that steer, and you have to have a route that we're travelling along. It's no good just saying, oh, we'll do everything for everyone, because it fails very quickly. You just end up tripping over yourself.
I strongly believe we have it, and I would have you as my Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Here's my bribe.
Is that all? Or do we talk more? I think we've covered all the questions, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
But...
Wow.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes of Speak Our Minds podcast.